Yeah, and I was remembering the last election. No one wanted to come out of their house after it. We were all just like, oh, just wake me up in a couple of years.
Right.
Now it's a couple of years, of course.
Just because of depression, not because of some sort of confrontation with pro-Trump people.
No,
Yeah,
it was just that we
Yeah.
had a sense that there was going to be someone in the White House who
Yeah.
would divulge secrets to Russia, would break the law, accept payments from foreign governments.
Well, thank God none of that happened in retrospect. What?
All right, it's October 18th, which is...
You're not talking into your mic. So this is something you can
It's-
plug
okay.
if we get this up in time.
We will be screening Tip of My Tongue on October 18th at the Filmmakers Cooperative at 475 Park Avenue South. Very convenient location, and they intentionally chose it because of the upcoming election and all the conversations that we have around politics.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you all saw, but I posted the part of the film on Anita Hill just a few
very
days
nice.
ago.
Very nice, yeah. So
That's
relevant.
like a kind of residual thing. You can take moments of the film since we are, I mean, it's all about talking about the 80s and, right, 70s and 80s, mostly when we were coming of age and becoming adults. So you have all these potential clips and moments to share.
There's a whole powerful segment of the film about women coming of political age and becoming politically aware that sort of culminates in the Anita Hill hearings. It's really a good, really strong section.
Thank you, Andrea.
Okay, so that was the voice of Andrea Kannapell, who is one of the participants, I'm going to call us, in Lynne Sachs' film, her nonfiction film called Tip of My Tongue. And we also are joined today by Accra Shepp, and who's one of the participants, and myself, who is a minor participant. and again, Lynn's here.
So glad to be here, Adam.
Welcome back to
Thank
the
you.
podcast. Right? Because we talked once before.
You were the first person to dive deep into the world of podcasts. First person I knew.
That you know. I mean,
Yeah, not the first person in the world, but the first person that I know.
Well, it turns out early on, compared to the flood that has since, like now, there's so many, everybody has a podcast, but so I was a little ahead of the game.
Yeah, just stick it to the
once.
Okay, what
Hills.
number is this, or what year? What
Oh,
number
this will
is this?
be, this is, I started the talk show, I'll say, because it was not a podcast originally, it was an internet radio show, 2011. So this is year 7. It was started becoming a podcast sort of a few years later. But it was still, even then, it was way ahead of, like, the just a huge number that have since, But
Hey, good idea. Good idea.
yeah, right. But wow, yeah, we shot you. Well, Lynn, I'm just starting up. You can dive in for background so people understand. You made this film. The concept was get a group of people all together in one place who all have had the experience of just recently turning 50 years old and come together and share their memories and thoughts and stories about their lives, which we all could relate to. And
Well,
is that
I
essentially?
decided when I turned 50, I decided that I needed to grapple with living half a century, but also with the history that I had witnessed. And I wanted to understand how that witnessing had impacted and imprinted on me, and how, as I grew older, how I started to parse out the meanings of those events in history, and whether I could understand them intellectually, whether they were just swirling around me and I was slightly aware of them. And then I decided to write 50 poems, one for each year, beginning with 1961 all the way to 2011. And in the process of doing that, I became very curious about how other people would interpret those same events, or maybe choose different events, and how things would what was important to me might be very inconsequential to somebody else. In a sense, I was wondering how our place in the world as people who had lived those years would give us what they call 20/20 vision, like, or would we? I didn't want 20/20 vision. I didn't want us to know what it all meant. Now, I wanted us to sink back into those times when we didn't have 20/20 vision, and when certain things were in focus and sharp and clear, and other things receded. So, I decided to try to find people. My goal was someone from every continent. I didn't quite succeed, but I worked on it. And not to talk to just people I knew well, but to try to branch out and to enlarge my field of vision around this kind of investigation.
Did these kind of what would you call them? These parameters that you're describing, did they ultimately inform your style of filmmaking, how you wanted it to look visually, the film, do you think?
Oh, that is a great question. Well, I actually did research with each person involved in the film, and which is 11 people, 12 counting myself, and I asked each person to choose 5 moments in their lives in which 5 or more, in which there was an intersection between a very private moment or a very public event and how that came to impact your private awareness, your consciousness, your interior.
That is such a big thing to unpack. I remember when you told me that, I was like, what? It was like, I understood all the words you said, but I'm not exactly sure what I was supposed to give you. And then we had a really lovely conversation, and then I kind of understood.
And the delightful thing, both Accra and Andrea and yourself, Andrea and I had said, how do you do? But we didn't know each other at all. And so I knew you 3 in this profound way and very quickly. And that was astonishing. I've never had anything like that happen in my life.
Well, it was really remarkable to come here for the first storytelling where you taped it and you were taking notes, and you just wanted these stories, and it wasn't clear at all what was actually, to me, it wasn't clear what was going to happen with those stories. So there was no pressure to produce I was just like, oh, she wants some stories. I have a lot of stories, and then actually in this room, or was it in that room? It was one of these 2 rooms that we're sitting in right now, right? This room, the basement kitchen. And you had the big tape recorder set up, and that was a little daunting. And then you just wanted to hear the story, and you were paying such attention. And I was so grateful that this story that I had, these pieces of stories from my life, were worth your attention, and your attention gave them even a certain value to me that they didn't have before. And I think that this whole project has given value to certain experiences that I've had and enabled me to hear other people's stories. And it's not a logical relevance, but it feels like an emotional relevance that is accorded to everyone's story.
So interesting. You were referring to some of the pre-interviews, or the
initial research,
right? Where you invited people here to your home. We're sitting right now in your home,
one at a time,
and we shared. I think we already had some back and forth through email or on the phone, but when we came prepared with certain stories from our lives that have stuck with us or that were important. And it's interesting because these are stories of dying to kind of share, but I didn't even know how to present them. I didn't know what the core of them or what the frame of it was. I just knew there were these moments and these feelings. They're kind of vague and blurry, and so it kind of gave me a reason to kind of figure that out a little bit more through our conversations. It was nice. It was like, I do want to talk about these things, and they matter to me. I don't know if they matter to anybody else, but they kind of created who I am.
As you're talking, I'm sitting here remembering your stories about summer camp, for example, and I've never met anyone who could take summer camp. The notion of summer camp is to feel very far away from the swirl of public events, like to be in the woods. But when you told your story about summer camp, it was all about, in a sense, the inverse of that summer camp was a place where you became politicized. And that was fascinating to me, something that's so much about this early childhood moment, and yet you gained this awareness.
Yeah. And there's no way to relay that experience to people who haven't gone through it. You know, I had a house guest this last week who is in the film business as well, and he came in to the city, and he stayed with me, and he was there for years, so he gets it. It's a nice thing to be able to have that experience with other people, but like kind of that we all went home. Going there, we were kind of going home. The rest of the year, it's all about trying to maneuver through people that didn't understand us in a life that wasn't really, you know, supporting the kind of weirdos we are. You know? It was difficult to figure that out in a place like Queens, you know.
I wanted to go back to, you asked me about the visuals, and I felt very committed to not having what we call talking heads, just sitting in chairs. And I also felt that by having you all tell these stories in somewhat awkward, somewhat physically unfamiliar, but also playful environments, that it might make you feel a little bit liberated. And so, for example, I filmed with Andrea in the bathtub, in water without a shirt on. And I don't know.
Why weren't you wearing a shirt?
Well,
the bathtub.
because she was in the bathtub.
Oh, I was talking to Lynne. Oh, you meant her,
yeah.
Andrea.
Yeah, Andrea. Right.
She was not.
But I don't know how. I was wondering if being in that context, or your body not being in a comfortable chair, but being in something that was both familiar, which is a bathtub, but not familiar in front of a camera.
Not familiar with like 5 people in the bathroom with you.
Yeah, and whether that charge brought out something in the story.
Well, it definitely brought out the storytelling, because and there was who was it I was telling the story to? Sarah. I was telling the story to Sarah, but there were other people watching, but she also had a very steady gaze and an extremely attentive, like she was truly listening. So yeah, I think it knocks you a little bit out of any. I mean, it's none of the stories I told are stories I tell. I mean, I have some stories I tell, but those are not the stories I tell normally. So I don't have a practiced way of telling any of the stories. And
that was really critical, that these weren't stories that had been practiced.
No.
What?
No.
They were all stories they weren't the stories that most of us tell at the dining room table. Mm-mm. And people say, oh yeah, we've heard that before.
Yeah, yeah. Nobody heard that. Nobody had heard that one.
And in point of fact, when I watched the film of you recounting the story in the bathtub, you seem so fully possessed by the memory that perhaps, I mean, I would like to imagine that you at first were aware of the 5 other people, but by the time you're in the story, you're kind of gulping for breath as you recall the moments. And, you know, what I tell my friends, I don't give away all the good parts about it. I say, your heart will be in your throat. That's what I tell them.
But I thought all of the situations were... There was the one where you and Shira...
Meaning me.
Yeah, you, Adam, and Shira, and Jim's were getting up periodically and moving around a sofa and sitting back down again, while Jim was talking about having trouble finding a job.
Right.
And you had a very different experience during the economic downturn, and you had a different experience. That it was just I love that it's like these inexplicable moments did not interrupt the storytelling at all. They kind of enhanced it somehow, which I guess is an argument to see the film, because I don't think you can explain it.
Well, I'm going to jump in only to say one of the main reasons that what catalyst that brought us together is that the film, which has already played in innumerable festivals around the world and premiered at MoMA's very prestigious Doc Fortnight last winter, it is now available digitally through a DVD, a Blu-ray, or just...
It's available on DVD and digitally, and it's actually also, I'll say, on Kanopy.
Which is the libraries.
Yeah, so that's actually the quickest way that anybody could see it, because to be on Kanopy means, you have if you have a library card like the Brooklyn Public Library, the New York Public Library, or probably the Memphis Public Library, or the Louisville
Memphis. Or Louisville, where my house guest was from. Are you from Louisville?
I'm from Louisville. Who is your house guest? I bet I know them.
Mark Rabinowitz. He's living there now. He didn't grow up there, though.
Oh, okay. Well.
Anyway, most or lots and lots of public libraries now have Kanopy with a K, and tip of my tongue is there.
You share good company. Frederick Wiseman's entire library is on Kanopy.
It is? Well, we're on Kanopy.
That's fantastic. I didn't know it was available on Kanopy. So go to Kanopy and check it out. If you have a library card. If you don't have a library card,
especially if you don't have a DVD player, as many people don't.
Or you take out your DVD player and find out it doesn't want to work anymore.
I'm happy that I made a DVD because I wanted people to have things to put on their shelf. Yeah. And I like an object.
Me too. Just tell me who did the artwork, since I put it on my phone's. It's on my phone's. What do they call it?
The wall or something?
The
wallpaper.
Page.
No,
wallpaper.
What comes? Yes, it's the
Locking
wallpaper.
screen?
It's the wallpaper.
The design of the DVD was created by Rebecca Chapas, who is my assistant and also my former student. So she took the scene with Andrea in it and did kind of what they call rotoscoping, and then she embellished. Right. Not you, because it looks just like you, but she embellished the bathtub. Yeah. So
you have fins.
It looks a little bit like Marat's sock.
I like that. I joked about this at our MoMA opening night, that the way it was shot, the framing of the shot was that it goes about halfway. The tub is about half. You don't see half of the tub, the empty part. So I just had this image when I was watching that scene of at the end of your conversation, at the end of your monologue, the camera pans and you like I'm sitting in the tub with you on the other side. Yeah. I don't know why. I just had this fantasy. And nothing untoward, I promise. But it was. I just like the idea of at the end, like a visual joke like that.
I was actually wondering if you would like to hear some of the stories that they tell, like where some of the events. Like I really love Accra's story about the lenticular ring.
Oh yeah,
and
yeah,
I bet if you heard us say there's a story about a lenticular ring, most people will not be able to guess how that crosses with history, but it does.
Well, yeah, I was just really amazed because the memory is so slight. When I was 6 years old, I got a 3D ring, a plastic ring, as a gift, and it was a picture of Martin Luther King, and then when you moved it slightly, it said, "I have a dream." And when you're 6 years old, of course, it doesn't take much. A gift is a gift. It's like, wow. It's like you're like super excited. And I was. And, unpacking the memory for Lynne, I was vexed by all this kind of ambiguity, trying to tease out what I kind of actually knew as a 6-year-old and what I might have known later on as an adult. And there were parts of the memory that were very clear. I could see where I was standing. I knew where the events had unfolded and the kind of light it was in. I knew that the thing had happened. But I was just like, I knew something had happened to Martin Luther King. Did I know he had died? I seem to somehow recall that I did know. But at 6, I wasn't yet watching the evening news, so I would have missed the whole assassination. But yet I didn't miss. I mean, I knew this is where the essential conflict came in. So it was funny. I didn't want to misrepresent the memory. And so I was super careful to frame the ambiguity as part of the memory. But you were just saying something earlier where you actually wanted to address that in the film, and I hadn't known that until just this moment. So I was like, oh, yeah, I did that.
And I also love that you didn't give yourself an extra, like, a more mature, a wisdom that you might not have had at that time. You never said that you completely grasped the gravitas of it. You kept yourself at that age, sort of like Tin Drum. You know, there's like an ability to stay in childhood, which is, for me, was really, really important.
Yeah, and I was just thinking what it gave me to hear that story, because one of my stories is about the Kennedy assassination, and I was younger, maybe 3, and watching it on TV. I am from Louisville, Kentucky. I grew up in a very rural environment. Louisville, that was 1963. By the time I was 5 or 6, there were, racial tensions in the United States were hitting a peak. I was protected from most of those things, but I knew that there were things about race that you did not talk about. But I didn't know what they were because you didn't talk about them. That wasn't something I could find out about. And I feel like there's a part of me missing from not knowing the rest of the story. And your story gave me a little piece of another world in a quiet way, in a very... not in a political way, not in a, I already know what this message means and that's why I'm telling you the story, just in a, here was my experience. And I can't say why I find that so valuable. It's just that it's so true. There's no ulterior motive in telling any of these stories. They just stand on their own. And for me, many of these stories filled in gaps of the bigger experience of the time. And in that way, the experience of being in the film and the experience of seeing the film has given me a sense of my generation, which is a bunch of people, like everybody's like, I didn't know what to make of that. Here's the strange thing that happened. Here were all the elements of it. And I feel so much enlarged, and like we actually are collectively a generation in a way that I hadn't previously experienced.
Accra, where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Born in New York City, lived here till I was 10, and then we decamped for Western Massachusetts after that. So we left just before the city slid into oblivion in 1972, and then I returned after I graduated college.
Okay, but you're a New Yorker. We could just...
Yeah.
And Lynne Sachs grew up in Memphis, Tennessee.
Indeed.
Where there is a Jewish population. People should know. Right?
Surprise, surprise, there is.
Well, and Atlanta, very big Jewish. I mean, it's not the only southern city. I was thinking one of my anecdotes, I can't remember. I don't think it made the film. I think the one that made the film was the Reagan, the heady times in the Schartoff family. It was like,
actually, will you tell that story?
That's it. Yeah, that's the one you guys were telling, right, as you were circling the sofa.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I was it about my dad's?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because all my stories, they weirdly they all seem to come from camp in some way. Those years. This one, I was already a counselor, but I remember in the 80s, I guess it was mid to late 80s, and I just remembered being on the phone, calling home for whatever reason, and from the office at the camp in Vermont, and my dad was very happy because he was flourishing financially, and he shared it, and he told me what he was making that year. I don't know. He never had such explicit conversation. I knew that they were middle class. We never had to worry about anything, and everything was, things were much cheaper to live then. But and he said, and I was like, oh, Jesus, that's much larger. I had no idea, So it kind of made me think about, after, I was thinking about how my dad is one of those people that was flourishing as a result of the economy, even though my parents were very, very anti-Reagan, and anti-Republican, vehemently so. And so it was this interesting thing to be kind of benefiting from that economy, while at the same time really hating what he stood for, Reagan, and that's what I talked about, I believe.
And I really appreciated your candor when you talked about that story, because some people, especially in documentary, people have a hard time talking about moments in which they're flourishing. It's much easier to complain and to
when you're broke.
When you're broke, and it seems like you'll engender some kind of sympathy,
and you can shake your fist. It's so straightforward. The narrative is so straight.
Yeah, and
so
it was
simple,
so great
right?
that you said that, because then it put it in contrast to Jim talking about his desperation just to have the most menial jobs, and that he also was trying to figure out what his relationship was to registering for the draft, and all of these ways he felt dehumanized. But you're all really just young people trying to figure out how to be.
Yeah, you have a particular look in your eye when you tell that story, Adam, there's this, there's the light comes in your eye somehow, and I can't presume to know what you actually were thinking, but what I took away is the possibility that you were hearing Jim's struggle, and there was a little bit of a wow, that did not happen to me.
What was it? What was his struggle? Refresh memory. I got to go open my
Sears,
DVD.
Yes.
Looking for work. No, I remember vividly.
What year though?
Like
it would have been 81.
82.
So really, he was a young guy, just a kid.
Yeah.
Trying to figure it out. He was because I could have.
The Reagan years lasted a long time.
They did last a long time.
So when we say the Reagan years.
Well, actually, no. That's right. Reagan was elected 84, so it would have been 84, 85, 86.
Oh, okay.
Right.
84, 92.
Then I made a mistake. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then I said 82. So
what?
Wait,
92?
No, because I got to college in 1984, and that fall, he was the president, the brand new president who was going to undo the world that I knew.
No, but that was the second election.
His second.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, because it was 84 to 88. Bush, 88 to 92.
Yes.
Bill
That's
Clinton,
right.
92 to 2000.
That's right.
But, but I was living in Boston at the same time, and I remember I won't allow my advanced age, his young age and lack of experience to be an obstacle, whatever he said about Mondale. Well, but it's funny, my only other anecdote...
You do a fine impersonation of Ronald Reagan.
Yes, thank you. My other thing was the other story I wanted to tell, though, and I appreciate that you wanted me to tell that other story that I wasn't comfortable doing. But I have a much more easier time building this very nostalgic, emotional story about Nixon resigning and being also in summer camp as a kid, though when it was upstate New York, and being in the dining hall. And the thing that also is different, or that goes against the typical narrative, is that in this hippie commie camp, and it really was just that, it was like a pink red diaper all the way. And there were like 50 kids, and we were all barefoot and just skinny dipping and singing folk songs. And one night they called us into the dining hall, and we all sat there. And the program director turned on the radio. We all listened to Nixon resign, and I was a kid of 9 years old, and I looked across the room, and there was one of the counselors, again, hippies, college students, crying. And I don't know why she was crying. She should be in a good mood. Richard Nixon is finally resigning. And it took years of that memory in my head of seeing her cry where I was able to figure out why she was crying, and what it did to the country and to all of our,
And actually, it's interesting because Sue Simon talks about that too. And I think it takes a certain a kind of wisdom and sophistication for us to realize that we can have empathy even with those people we hate most. We can still understand them as human beings.
I didn't look at it that way, though.
Oh. Okay.
Which is but I could be wrong. Maybe she was.
No, I mean, I was reading it, I think, more like you were understanding it, that he was a human being, but he also symbolized something for the country that had been undone and was unclear that it could ever be refashioned again. He might have broken it permanently.
Yeah, and that it was a devastating, tearing of
it
the
was
innocence.
A tearing,
and it was also in the midst of the Vietnam War and so much else, and who knows what this young woman had experienced in her life. I have no idea. I don't even remember who it was.
Well, I want to say there are a few things in the film that have come back cyclically, and it's really horrible. So, the shootings in high schools.
Oh, yeah.
When Columbine happened, Columbine happened, 2 teenagers walked into their Colorado high school and started shooting. And I know exactly where I was when that happened. I know I was sitting on a couch. I was in Philadelphia. I was teaching. I was had to be there overnight. We were watching the reports come in. And it never occurred to me, ever, that would be more than once in a lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
And it is numerous times, and it's become worse. There's a number of other stories in the film, like currently we're living through the Supreme Court nomination of Brett Kavanaugh, and we're having to face his.
Anita Hill.
What?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, we're having to face his
mendacity.
His mendacity and his I don't know what you like, sexual exploits, and his irresponsibility and his manipulation of a situation in these political ways. And it is so close to what happened in 1991 with Anita Hill. It just makes you kind of shiver.
It's worse.
It's worse.
I think it's
well,
worse.
I mean, I was...
Because there wasn't 20 years before that same thing happening where we,
Right, we didn't learn a lesson.
Well, I mean, it also
On top of
embodies a good deal of the legacy of ill will from Nixon, because Kavanaugh belongs to, for lack of a better term, a cabal of right-wing ideologues who feel that because the score has not been evened, that the ends always justify the means. And so in his confirmation as an appellate court judge, he lied to the Senate, I believe, on 3 occasions. And
I didn't know that.
it's well known. And then during his Supreme Court nomination, before the accusations of rape came down, he lied twice. The lie that I most vividly recall was something to do with some documents that were stolen from the Democrats that were passed to him. And he lied. He said he never got them. And then when it was shown that he did receive them, he said, "Oh, I didn't know they were stolen." But the initial lie stands. He said he never got them, but he did. So the fact that he didn't know they were stolen, immaterial.
Right, but even then, besides the lie about it, he also chose to use them
Yes.
Knowing that they got to him in a circumspect.
They were marked confidential. They were clearly
he wasn't
not,
supposed to.
He was clearly not supposed
anybody
to see them.
ethical would have returned them, found out where they came from, and made it public. He used them. So and then lied about it recently. Right?
And so that was his appellate
guy.
nomination. And that evidently stretched on, Andrea, you may know, for 2 years, I believe, it took for his appointment because
I don't know.
he was so embattled as an appellate court judge. This is nothing new for the man.
Yeah.
But
So-
I think one of the reasons that we care so much about this case, we would anyway, I'm sure. It's riveting. But I think because we do have a sense of the history we have, and we had that experience of a president, when it emerged what Nixon had actually done, it was stunning. It was unthinkable that a president would not hold himself to a higher standard and would lie and would manipulate and would organize crime to support his own power structure. We know more about what he was willing to do, and now we know more about what other presidents have been willing to do. Kennedy doesn't look as good now as he did when I was young. In some ways, many presidents don't look as good, but I think that the betrayal of realizing how much Nixon had lied and cheated, and had been criminal, was a ripping. It was a real ripping, painful thing. And I can't say that there were probably many people in the United States who had already been ripped to shreds by the power structure and knew not to trust it. But most of us seem to have started off with some kind of trust. And the betrayal of that trust is another commonality that I found. And it has made me hyper vigilant about official misconduct.
I wanted to say one other thing about Anita Hill. When I was editing the section of the film on Anita Hill with my assistant, and who was also the editor, Amanda, she was 26, 27 when we were working on it. And I said, this is the section about Anita Hill. And she said, well, who is Anita Hill? And she's very, very educated
really
young woman.
Intelligent and astute.
It's just that the story, it hadn't had a chance to come back yet. And
so this is a great opportunity. Why are people complaining?
Yeah, right.
Take your lemons and you make your lemonade. I don't understand.
Everybody knows Anita
Finally,
Hill
Anita
now.
gets her day in the sun.
Not enough sugar to make that sweet ever.
No, not at
And
all.
she finally got Biden's apology.
Oh, that's
Really?
right.
Yeah.
And the comeuppance, because his campaign for the presidency is totally shadowed by his performance in those hearings.
Well, there's
Well,
plenty of time.
There's a lot
before-
to be said for being able to apologize and being able
Yes,
to
that's
acknowledge
a
that
very
you're
good
wrong.
point.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I
Yeah.
think it's also there's still plenty of time.
What if, and this wouldn't
I
have
don't
happened,
think
but
he
what
stands
if
a
Brett
chance.
Kavanaugh had said, I made
Yeah.
a mistake. I was a stupid 15-year-old.
Well, then it would be different. It would be entirely different. But then he probably
Still wouldn't be
would have-
appropriate, but-
he would have also had to have not lied about the other things he lied about. But he wouldn't be on the hook for this if he had said that, I'm certain.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the manipulation of the truth. It's that's the
Manipulation of
problem,
truth.
the biggest problem he has. And this is the highest most truthiness spot of all of the truthiness places there is the Supreme Court, right? I mean, so
We would
he's
hope.
the last person you want on the Supreme Court.
Really, I mean, and it's so interesting. The true dilemma of him being elevated to a Supreme Court justice is that, I mean, people worry about Roe v. Wade. That's the tip of the iceberg. He would undo just about everything. They have already decimated the Voting Rights Act. We could see things go back to 1945. That's Strom Thurmond would be proud.
Definitely. So I just want to say I only have about 7 more minutes.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, is any other?
Yeah. Well, again, let's repeat
Okay.
that, clearly a sequel is in order. We know that. Turning 55.
Well, I've had the chance for some delightful sequels because I've had a chance to
Yes, you
travel
have.
with both of you, and to have, like, we went to Pittsburgh and we went to Northern California, and that in itself
You're
has
pointing
been,
at Andrea
excuse me,
and at
Andrea
Accra. Yeah.
and I went to Pittsburgh with Sarah, and Accra, and I went to the Mill Valley Film Festival, and which is happening right now.
Oh,
so
that's
that was
right.
exactly a
year
year ago
later.
that we were there. And the thing is about making a film is that it's a gift on multiple levels. We've had reunions in community gardens and over dinners, and every single time the conversation becomes so deep. We there's no fluff because what we have together, we know, comes from this very layered.
Yeah. The seeds of our relationship
The seeds
were
of our
planted
relationship are
deep in the ground and really fertilized. And,
Yeah.
So now it's really, it's a real meaningful, rooted type
And
of
it's
thing.
totally
So
different from the reunion you might have with
Yeah.
your high school buddies.
Well, it's fascinating what you said at the top, where you said that you just plunged in to all of our lives, into the most intimate details. And it was fascinating hearing you, Adam, and you, Andrea, talk about what these stories represented. In some sense, I felt that, the validation of having someone listen officially was an act of completion. And I was really struck by that, because for me, I was struggling to imagine that I had anything to say.
Oh, well, I just wanted to add one more thing, which was 9/11. So there are so many things that happen, and the September 11th happens every year. So I feel like I have my own experience, but I have collected your experiences too. So somehow, it's like a dream. Did that really happen to me, or did it happen to you?
Oh my.
I know that
Yeah.
I wasn't as close to the towers as either of you, or you.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, you were pretty close.
very
Both of you.
close, yeah.
So I hear it in the film, and I hear it's just in my consciousness, and that's part of, like, finding community when we collect other people's stories and they give a deeper meaning to something.
I think through this film I see the way we function as a bridge between, among eras. And we all started in our chunk of whatever that era was, and in the environment of that era. But that era was the beginning of the media age. It was the beginning of mass culture. But we still had the experience. Our childhoods were not that. Our consciousness was formed by something far more private and far more immediate. And I see us confronting over and over again through these stories a massive wave of cultural change that we have all. I mean, what I really like is that everyone met that with a great deal of humanity. There's nobody ranting in rage in this film. People are they're reliving what they experienced, and they're being heard. And it's very powerful to watch people listening in this film. I think you can't walk away from this film and not be a better listener. You might or might not be a better storyteller, but you're definitely going to have the sense that you hearing someone else is an extremely valuable thing.
Oh, you just made something click in my head, because I've heard Lynne refer many times to the fact that she wanted to create an active listener in the frame for the audience. And now I kind of understand it, hearing you say that, because it is when Lynne was listening to you tell your stories and Adam tell your stories, Lynne was the official listener. But to have that reified, to have an official listener taking something in and be visually compelling, invites the viewer or gives the viewer permission to be that listener as well.
Yeah, this is, I've asked different audiences when we've done Q&As before different audiences. I've said young people in particular have really resonated with us. And I think it's because it's the idea that your experience really is meaningful. You might not see it at this moment in time, but your experience is meaningful, and you can't figure out what it is until you tell it to someone else, and until you listen to other people telling what happened to them.
Tip of My Tongue is currently available on DVD. Where do they order that? Can they get that?
It's at the Tip of My Tongue DVD is at the Filmmakers Cooperative, Canyon Cinema, and also Cinema Guild.
They can order it, though.
They can order the DVD. If it's home video, it's really cheap, maybe $25. And if it's an institution, you can order it through Cinema Guild. And you can also just find it online, streaming through Kanopy.
Kanopy with a K. But they can. It's not on Amazon, is it? Like for the DVD, if you want to just buy one.
The Amazon.
I don't know. Is it?
That's a good question.
Can they go to your website? And
they can go to my website.
There? Okay.
Yeah, LynneSachs.com.
Okay.
But also they can go to Cinema Guild.
Oh, Cinema Guild's website. Okay, yeah. They're just the distributor for the DVD. Thank you, Andrea Kannapell Accra Shepp and Lynne Sachs.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Adam Schartoff.
Thank you.
Thank you.